Welcome, friends, to the Someone Gets Me podcast. I am your host, Diane Allen, and I am so delighted that you're here. This podcast was created because I believe there is a visionary leader inside each one of us who is waiting to be seen. In each episode of Someone Gets Me, you will hear useful tips from successful visionaries who will share their stories about how being seen has allowed them to take their vision out into the world with action. Surviving this insane world as a gifted woman. Hi, everybody. I have Nicole White with me, and she's coming to you from Philadelphia, and I'm coming to you from Winston-Salem. And we're going to talk about what it's like as intense and sensitive gifted women trying to walk through this often crazy world. Now, Nicole has a lot of credentials in this area, and you can read those in the show notes because we're not going to waste our time on this interview going over all the education and credentials. The two of us have plenty of them. So go to the show notes, check out her links, learn about her. We're on LinkedIn together, and I watch everything she puts up, and it's all really good. So Nicole, thank you for taking the time out of your day and coming here to Someone Gets Me and having this conversation about a very tricky topic, but a very important topic.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Diane. And I just want to say how grateful I am to have found you and this podcast and your work as well. You've enlightened me on a lot of things in my own, so thank you for that.
Oh, you're so welcome. I'm so glad. I'm glad we found each other. It feels really fun.
It does.
I want to start off this talking a little bit about what it was like for you when you learned, figured out, or discovered, whatever word you want to use, that you were a gifted person. Like, how was that when that was all uncovered?
It's funny. My story is a bit of a seesaw. So I can think back to being a child, being in kindergarten. And what I used to do during playtime, you have kids, hitting each other in the head with blocks and that whole thing. And here I am sitting in the corner reading a book. And it's funny because my kindergarten teachers, my mom later told me this story. I remember parts of it, but she told me that my kindergarten teachers came to her and said, well, we kind of think that she might have some type of, disability. All she does is sit and stares out the window or just sits in with the book. What's wrong with her kind of thing. And through that, they actually discovered that I actually could read, not only that, but at a third grade level in kindergarten. So that was kind of my first introduction into, I guess I'm a little bit more advanced than the rest of the people of my age kind of thing. But then it kind of died out because it was squashed. It was, you're not really better than anyone else. Don't try to be. They recommended putting me up a couple grades. My mom said, no, I don't want her to do that. I want her to be with everyone else. So fast forward through school, in advanced placement classes, but, pretty normal experience aside from bullying, and which we'll probably touch on at some point. In the workplace, you don't notice how different you are to yourself. Everyone else can see it, but you don't. And I had a coworker pull me aside, actually, one day. I was really frustrated, going through a lot with my team. I was a new supervisor. And she pulled me in the office and said, do you understand why people react to you this way? Do you understand why people treat you this way? And I'm like, no, please tell me, enlighten me, please. She's like, you're gifted. And I'm just like, well, yeah, I'm smart, but that doesn't mean treat me horrible. Like, what does this have to do with anything? Like, it didn't connect at that time either. I just had periods in life where I was made aware of it, but it just didn't connect until really recently. Actually, I'd say the last 6 months or so, really, having similar experiences in different workplaces, having the gifted experience of moving from job to job and not really feeling fulfilled, and digging in to try to figure out what was wrong with me. That's kind of where it started. And I thought back to some of the stories I just shared with you with, the kindergarten thing and the workplaces and the coworkers, and said, well, what is this gifted thing? I went through looking at literature about Asperger's, about autism, and started seeing some of myself in some of those too. So I'm thinking, well, maybe I'm autistic, maybe I have Asperger's, maybe there's some other explanation of what's wrong with me, until I discovered giftedness, as literature and research goes, and some of your work and the work of Mary Elaine Jacobson, I think her name is, her book, The Gifted Adult. And I really started to see myself in that, in those stories, in those people. I'm like, then it finally connected. That's when it finally went off for me. Like, oh, it was one of those moments. And through all of that, it never really clicked until now, and I'm 40 years old. So,
Well, I'm glad it's clicking now.
yeah.
Right. And
Mm-hmm.
so tell a little bit about what I'm interested in is some of the challenges that you've gone through in like work or in school where
Mm-hmm.
like you were naive to being gifted, but yet other people could see it. You didn't know it was a thing.
Yeah.
And you
Mm-hmm.
started out looking for what's wrong with you, but really it's something that's right with you, but you didn't know that at first. So what are some of the experiences, just if you can just think of a couple that pop off your head that you've had to live through um, because you just didn't know?
Ooh. That could get really deep. Growing up, I was pretty much ostracized from the rest of my family. Um, Everyone else was, the typical, I guess, kid, for lack of a better way of saying it. And again, I was that kid that would just sit and read books or, play by myself, make up imaginary friends, like kind of a typical, stereotypical, almost gifted child story. And I just don't think my family understood it. And I was just othered as, she's over there kind of. It didn't help being one of the youngest in the family either. So my older sister and cousins, they were always together and, always connecting. And I was just always kind of left to my own devices. It was kind of lonely, but at the same time, I had gotten used to and okay with being by myself. So it didn't feel bad at the time I was going through it. It just felt like that's the way that things were.
Right.
Because I didn't understand it.
Yeah, that's what you knew. Are you naturally introverted?
I am. I can't do too much of anything as far as being outgoing. I'll probably take a nap after this. Who knows? But I am definitely very, very introverted. Which I learned to embrace that first, actually, and I thought that was part of what was wrong with me. So that was another part of my journey with that. But with school and with later with work, it was more or less the same. It was people treating me as if I was an alien, if I was other, being bullied, of course, for everything under the sun. I think people had a hard time articulating what it was that bothered them about me. So they would pick anything under the sun. I'm ugly, I'm too dark, I'm too skinny. That not now, but then I was skinny. I was too smart, so I was teased for that, which is weird, but anything that anyone could pick on, my shoes were too big. But I think that was their attempt of trying to find what that was disconnecting us without really understanding it themselves either. That was just their way of lashing out. And then the same thing happens in the workplace. You show up and you think you're just being you. You're not trying to be extra. You're not trying to be anything other than. But people experience you differently. So they think that you're trying to outshine them. They think that you're trying to outdo them. And then the claws come out when they start to feel that way. So it's the sabotage. It's the holding back in the career. It's the smear campaigns, the rumor mills, all of those things that I've experienced in the workplace.
Wow. Yep. I can relate to all of that. You were just reminding me of, there's this really amazing woman who I worked with in a mental health facility that we were working in, and we were talking about being different. Like we weren't really talking about it in the gifted context. We weren't using those words, but that's what we were talking about. And we were talking about how we're kind of like the black sheeps of the family, and we're different than everyone else. And so like when I was in high school, when I was a senior in high school, I thought for sure I was an alien. And I remember looking at my peers at a pool party at a friend's house and going, they don't even see me. Like they think they know me, but they just are seeing the plastic, or like what I felt like was the alien part. Like the real me was in there. And it was just, that was just the way it was. Like I didn't have a feeling about it other than I had the awareness of it. And what my friend was sharing with me was that in her family, she was not only ostracized because she was introverted and loved to read and kind of would always just be in her own world reading. Like she didn't really want to go do much else because she was really enjoying her books when she was very little. So it kind of reminded me of what you were saying about how you were in kindergarten. My first book I read was a dictionary, like it's just like I look back and go, well, there was a clue. But what she also said, when you made the comment about being too dark, she was judged by her family because her skin was so much lighter than everybody else. And that her skin was so much lighter. And we know it's genetic. I mean, obviously that's how our skin tone comes out. But she was really judged because everybody was really dark in her family and she was significantly lighter. And so they pushed her away even further than like her peers did. And so she was really ostracized by her family because her skin was lighter than the rest of them. And she didn't figure out that was not okay, like, because it's just how it always was since she was born.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And until she was in her mid-30s. And then there was a lot of emotion and a lot of grief about what do you do with that? How do you reconcile that? And you just reminded me of that story because I really felt for her when she was telling it to me, because I'm like, really? I'm like, okay. I think God gave me a level of being just innocent and naive, kind of like, I just love people. When I look at a person, I see God with skin. I don't see, I mean, anything I see, like the color of somebody's skin, all I see is the beauty in that, not comparing to something else. So I really can credit my mother, I think, with some of that education, but that's really sad that people are that way. It makes me want to cry right now. Like
your own family,
Huh?
Your own family. Like, who would have thought that your own family would be that way? And I had a similar experience to her where I didn't really realize, like I told you, that I was being mistreated until I was well into adulthood. Because you don't know what normal is, because that's all you know is being mistreated.
Right. And so then when you realize that it was mistreatment, when you get older and you realize it, there's a lot of grief to heal. And part of that is, of course, anger and all that. What have you done to help yourself reconcile the travesty that you had to live through in your own family? Like, what have you done to reconcile that in your adult life? I mean, you have a professional career. You are an amazing woman. So what did you have to do to get yourself in a place where you could feel really good about yourself on the inside?
I first have to credit, our higher power, whatever you want to call it. I think there's just something inbuilt in me that just kept me determined all through all of that I can't even take credit for. Something there. Consciously, I'll say, once I discovered everything, I really went on that self-discovery journey of, okay, well, instead of me looking at myself through other people's perceptions, which I've done for 30 plus years, who am I actually? If I peel away those perceptions and those labels and those things that people threw at me, because that's the only way they could see me is through their own perceptions and labels. What's under that? The real me is somewhere under all of that. So I had to start peeling away those layers. Oh, well, being quiet isn't a bad thing. Liking reading isn't a bad thing. Being dark-skinned isn't a bad thing. Like, all of these things, especially in workplace settings where it's, oh, well, you're too thoughtful, or you think too much, or you're too this and you're too this, or you're not enough this and you're not enough that, and just peeling and dissecting literally like each of those things. I had a journal, and whatever would come to mind that day that I experienced, I would write down and say, okay, well, what is this? This is how I experienced it, but what really is it? And I had to force myself. It didn't come naturally to me. I'm better with it now, but I had to force myself to really think through it. Okay, this is what they threw at me. This is what they're saying. Is there truth to it? Because in all fairness and self-development, maybe there is something that I could do better or differently. And I want to hold myself accountable to that too. But, what's all that other stuff that doesn't need to be there? And just taking that out and working with what's left, which was me.
Yeah, that's really smart. I think journaling and really paying attention to what the truth is really matters, because when we realize that, as I say to everybody, what anyone says is about themselves. So when I'm in those kind of bullying situations, or people, are attacking because they don't understand or they're afraid, that's great that I can understand that process, but it's still not okay to bully. Right? It doesn't excuse away the behavior, and it doesn't excuse away the consequence of the behavior, even though we understand it, right? And I think that's important to remind ourselves that we can understand it all day long, and it's still not okay.
Right. And that's kind of where I am personally, and with my work, the things that I put out on LinkedIn, that's what I'm trying to put out to the world. This happens to people. People go through this. There are people in your organizations or in your family that treat people like this. That's not okay. You need to shed light on it, and you need to be responsible and accountable for that behavior. And how do we change that? That's really the underpinning of why I want to do what I want to do.
Right. That's your vision. That's like your soul. Like when you said, you weren't allowed to give up because there was a higher calling within you that was going to come through no matter what. It kept you going. And when you said that, I'm like, yep. I remember how many times I said, I quit. I'm going to go be the blue light special lady at Kmart and say, take too much shoppers. I'm done. But I wasn't allowed, like on a soul level, like I wasn't allowed to do that. But I can't tell you how many times, like, this is it. I'm not doing this anymore. This world is too insane. It's too negative. It's too toxic. There's so much bullying going around. And all I'm trying to do is something good and nice. And I'm not perfect. I'm not trying to say I was perfect, because I made a lot of mistakes along the way. And you still don't need, it's just still as tricky, is the way I see it. So what do you see if we could go ahead 20 years, 50 years? What would you like to be the reverberating kind of impact of Nicole White's world on the world? What's the impact that I'm getting goosebumps, that you would just really love to see as a result of your work?
I love that question. I don't want to leave the world in a place where my gifted son has to go through the same things I did, or my gifted grandchildren, because, it could be hereditary. There's research on that, but, my son is definitely gifted too. So how do I change the world in a way that these conversations are no longer necessary, I guess, if that makes sense? How do we change the world into something where people just are people who treat people with basic regard and respect, regardless of their intellectual ability or their skin color or their sex or their gender, or whatever, however they identify? How do we get there? And I want my work to be able to empower people to both hold themselves accountable and also learn any skill necessary to be able to do that. So personally speaking, with your own self-development, how do you dissect yourself in the way that I described earlier? How do you do that so that you can identify those areas that you need to change in order to be that person? And in workplaces, there's so many leaders who are just not competent in leadership. I hate to say it that way. It sounds snooty, but that's the truth. Kind of direct. It just is. They may be technically skilled, but they have no people leadership skills, or very little emotional control. So how do we get those skills to those leaders, and how do we address the character issue that we have nowadays? There is definitely a character issue that we have, especially in leadership. How do we rid organizations of those people so that we have good people of good character, people of good skill of leadership who want to see people and organizations thrive in the right roles? It seems very reverse now, where you have people who have those skills being held back or held down or held away, and you have the people who aren't so much in the positions that maybe they shouldn't be. How do we change that? How do we flip that dynamic so that people aren't leaving work stressed, having mental illness issues caused by their work environments, and all the things that we see nowadays?
Right. Well, there's a big consequence to being in such a toxic, topsy-turvy, upside down environment, whether it's at home or at work, and or both. And our culture is totally upside down and topsy-turvy. And we were talking about that a little bit before we hit record. And so what do we do, right, to help get the ship going in the right direction? So part of it's education. Part of it is awareness, and part of it is setting a standard and being the role model for the standard. Right? Because I think one of the mistakes people make is they think that everybody knows what they know. And that's not true. And also we're taught that everybody thinks the same. And that's not true. No two people think the same. Like the whole neurodiversity conversation is not even close to where it needs to be, because everyone is neurodiverse. There is no such thing as two people doing it the same way. It's just like our fingerprints are different. And that is independent of all of the typical external things. That's a neurological thing. That's a biology thing. That's, of course, impacted by the environment and everything, but it goes way deeper, and there's much more to diversity than sexuality or skin color or whatever. It's way bigger than that. And I mean, I've done a lot of diversity training, and I've had to sit through them and all these other things in my whole career. And I'm like, but there's more than that. That what everybody's talking about isn't enough. And it outrages me because of the limiting belief or the limiting content, that is placed on something that I don't even know why it's even a discussion. I mean, I know why it's a discussion academically, but I don't resonate with it because I don't, that's not how I do the world.
Right.
I have a person I'm working with who is from Colombia, and really cool dude. And, part of the beginning work was, am I getting all these opportunities because of my race, because of now what's going on in the world? I said, well, actually, you're getting all these opportunities because you're damn good at what you do. And you've earned it. And he goes, yeah, I guess I have. I said, okay, so that's the truth. The truth is you earned it. That's the truth. Where you come from is kind of cool and trippy and neat. But that's not, that alone didn't get you where you are.
Right.
We look at, I was just thinking about Serena Williams. She did not get where she was based only on her race.
Right.
She didn't. Because if it was only on that, she would never have made it.
Exactly.
She had to work her butt off to get there on multiple levels, emotionally, spiritually, physically, in every way. And to just show up with her A game often, even in the face of adversity. It wasn't just that. And it annoys me. It annoys me so much when people say it's only because of somebody's race or their heritage, or they look like this, or they're from there, or whatever it is. I don't.
We're so beyond that. And I look at that two ways. If you look at it systematically, perhaps it's intentional. Who knows? In trying to keep, the status quo going. But also being in the learning and development and consulting space, one of the things I run into that also drives me nuts, that's similar to this, is the fact that you're, I guess, taught or instructed to teach, to dumb things down, essentially. You water things down so much in an organizational training environment that people don't leave trainings really learning anything more than what they already knew, save for maybe a bullet point or two. So that to me is related to what you just said, and the fact that it's intentionally watered down because the thought is, well, people can't handle that, or it's too much, or it's too complicated. And that could be true in some instances, but at what point do we go beyond that? We've been talking, like you said, about race and gender for decades now, and here we are still having this conversation. So something more has to happen,
Right. And then you add on it being gifted and processing differently. And all the other, I think it's really cool stuff. I just dig it. But I also watch people go, oh, you work with, like I tell people, I'm an intuitive mentor and I work with gifted, creative people. And unless I'm talking to a gifted person or an open-minded person, I hear, what? You work with who? What? And then the judgment comes. And I've worked a lot in substance abuse. Oh, those people. And I've learned over the years, instead of to defend it, I say, we're like a Visa card. We're everywhere you want to be.
I love that.
And kind of derail that ignorance, because ignorance and innocence are the same vibration. So when we realize that they're the same vibration, then maybe the person just doesn't know. Mm-hmm. And maybe it is calculated and maybe they do know, but who are we to assign motive?
Right.
That's not our role. Our role is to bring awareness. Our role is to take a stand for what's right. So let's talk for a minute about quiet quitting.
Yes.
It's a big topic out there in the world. You're an expert in this area because this is what you do in the corporate training, psychology, industrial space. And funny, after we talked about you coming on the show and we were emailing about it, quiet quitting is part of our conversation. Within a week, 7 or 8, I don't know, maybe more, videos and posts showed up in my feed on all my social media about quiet quitting. No accident there that we're being tracked and traced. I wasn't seeing any before that, even though I know it's a thing, right? Like I go, oh, that's interesting. So what are your thoughts about quiet quitting? And maybe define it a little bit for the listeners in case they're not sure what we're talking about. And how does that affect gifted people? How does that affect women? How does that affect somebody who's trying to make it in the world, or maybe trying to do the right thing, but yet has this energy around them? Like, how does that work? Like, what do supervisors do when their people are doing that? Like, will you just talk a little bit about that? Because I think the impact is much different than what is being not said out there in the world.
Agreed. Yes. So the simplest definition of quiet quitting that's out there is when people show up to work, they do the bare minimum just to get their paycheck. They don't put any extra effort, and they go home. They do what they feel that they're paid for, essentially. In the traditional environment of showing up to work and putting in your extra effort and being gung ho and woo rah rah, a lot of leaders are a little nervous about that mindset because they feel like they're not getting, I guess, all that they can get from their employees. I have an opinion about which I'll say for later, but generally that's what the basic conversation is. Now it's veered off into different subsections from what I see in different articles, where you have people who say that, this isn't new. People have been doing this for years. You show up to work, you do what you got to do, and you go home. Because people, especially from a diversity space, you have people who are marginalized, disabled people, people of color, who show up and have to go through so much in a workspace. It doesn't motivate them to want to do anymore or anything more than what they're paid to do to go home to feed their families. So that's been going on forever. So really, that's not new. I mean, and not just for marginalized people. Everyone has faced some type of hardship in the workplace, and sure, bullying and all of that. So when you have all of those dynamics that we were talking about earlier in a workplace setting, who would want to show up and
Right.
give more than what they're paid to do? They're there to feed their family because they have to. Organizations are really structured right now to, well, most, I won't say all, most organizations are structured to have people want to show up and want to do more, especially with other obligations. People have families, they have, maybe disabilities they're working through, or, mental illness, physical illness, dealing with what's going on in the world, all of these things that organizations don't account for. They just expect you come, you show up and give 110, and we don't really care about the rest of you as a person. So I think that's kind of, there's two folds to the debate. You have leaders who are saying, well, this is a problem because we don't want half engaged employees showing up. And you have employees showing up saying, well, you need to do something to make me want to be more engaged in this. So there's two sides that are at odds. And then there's the whole quiet firing thing that kind of spun off the quiet quitting, where bosses are, quietly gathering cases and gathering information to quietly get rid of people they don't want in the workplace. So it's spinning out of control right now. And I like you said, I don't think people are really zeroing in on what actually needs to be talked about is the workplace environment and the problems within that, which is causing all of this. Instead of pointing fingers at leaders or employees, it's the structure of the actual work environment that's causing this issue.
That makes sense. That makes total sense to me, that it's the environment. Where do you think entitlement comes into play with this? Is entitlement part of this dynamic or not? What do you think?
My initial response would be no. But I do know, just from experience in being in the leadership position in the past, that you do have some employees who show up and are entitled and or try to take advantage of the system. And I think, to be fair, I think that might be some of the concern of leaders as well, is, well, how do you mitigate, those type of employees, and how do you differentiate them from, your typical employee who just needs more to be engaged? So there is a subset of people who take advantage of the situation. And I think that might be what that could be alluding to. Then that's a tough one. And I think that has to do more with performance management skills of leadership, leaders being more in tune with their teams as people, in more so than the technical aspect of being a leader, just making sure you're pressing the buttons and that's all I care about. But who do I have on my team as people? Who is this person that I have? And teaching leaders rapport building and getting to know their employees and skills of that nature to make sure that they have a deeper understanding of the people on their team, so that they can better manage those type of things. But I think that's also multidimensional too, which might be a different topic, more geared to organizational development. But I definitely think leaders are not equipped to deal with a lot of what they're faced with now. The workplace has changed drastically, I'd say, in the last definitely 5 years, 5 to 10 years from what we're used to. And most leaders are still trying to lead from the traditional model where it's not gelling. So what we're seeing with quiet quitting and all this other thing, all these other terms and phenomena coming up, is that clash between leaders trying to lead in the old way. It's just not working because the nature of work and people in the world has just changed.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me, because I hear people say, I want to go back to the old way, and people, this is how it's always been done. And I just say, well, the universe is always expanding in unity, diversity, and complexity. Everything's always moving forward. We cannot go back. We cannot hold on. And maybe it's part of being willing to grow and evolve as an organization, as a leader, as an employee. Like, I think it's on all of us. The onus is on all of us to be a little bit more open, or a lot more open in some cases, and be willing to grow and evolve and be open-minded to the way to do things.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So the rest of your question, you mentioned the specific impacts on different groups of people as far as women and being gifted. I think with being gifted, I'm having flashbacks as I say this, but with being gifted, quiet quitting becomes somewhat of a survival mechanism in a workplace. If you're in a work environment and you have all of these capabilities that maybe you're not using, either because you don't know that they're there or your environment just doesn't dictate that you can, and you're forced to, operate at a level that's below your capacity. I don't know how else to say that, but then you have some cognitive dissonance going on. You have some push and pull going on there where, especially if you don't know you're gifted because you're trying to fit in, you're not quite sure why you're experiencing this. It doesn't quite make sense to you. And you try for as much as you try, it's not going to work because you're just wired differently, but you don't know that. So you just end up tuning out a lot. You end up doing the bare minimum, which you can bear because that's really what your mind can take until you can make sense of the rest of what's going on with you. Or not with you, but with the situation in general. And so I think it's just what people do just to get by. You have to put food on the table. If your circumstance hasn't dictated that you could, get a college degree or training or whatever it is for you to get a different type of position. Let's say you have to, be that lady at Kmart for, whatever, for lack of a better description. And, that's not fulfilling that creative soul that you have inside you, but you have to do it with the food on the table. So you have to show up somewhat disengaged just to make that work. Otherwise, you're internally, mentally frazzled and fried and not in a good place.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I think a lot of quiet quitting too. I think there's a lot of just survival mechanism. Either I'm being ignored or I have more to give and you're not listening or whatever. I think that it has been going on for a long time as a survival skill when people aren't being appreciated or understood, or they're not looked at as people, they're looked at as numbers.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the companies who want everything out of you and they're the first to lay you off or fire you or not care if something happens.
Everyone's dispensable.
Yeah. And so there's just so many layers. It's so faceted. There's so many layers. And then you add in, somebody's heritage or their skin color or how they identify, or do they wear their hair weird? What is weird? Like all of those things. Like, to me, something that might be totally normal, somebody else might go, that is like really weird, and I'm like, what do you mean? That's
like my hair. I get that all the time. Like, it's not professional, but yeah, it's not. Well, times are changing now, but it's definitely still a mindset that braids aren't professional. It's like, well, my hair doesn't do straight, so either you get this or afro. Pick one.
Well, I secretly wish I could have braids like that.
You could.
My hair's too fine and come out.
No, it won't. There's a way to. If I was to meet you in person, I could do it.
I'm into Philly. I'm from Philly, and you're going to tell me how to do it because I'm like, really cool braids. I'm like, I want really cool braids.
You can.
I tried braiding
them.
Yeah. Okay. So there you go. I'm coming up, and you're going to show me, and then that'll be really fun.
Awesome.
And it's funny because my hair was really, really straight like this all growing up, and I just had it cut because if you were to catch me right after I wash it, it's extremely curly now because it's getting curlier as I get older. And I don't know what to do with curly hair. It's like all a new thing. And and I think that being open-minded and loving to learn and keep growing, it's fine. It's fun. Like, okay, I'll do something different instead of I have to go back white, get all mad that it's not still the way it used to be because we can't go back. Okay, so I have one last question because I could talk to you forever, but I'm also very aware that you have generously offered your time for this conversation, and I'm getting so much out of it. And so if somebody's listening to you and they've already probably hit all your social media and websites, because that's what my listeners do. They love to go and research people and stuff because they're gifted. And they're listening to you and they're like, but how can I be part of the solution? What can I, like my little own lonely self? I don't work at a big company, or maybe they do. Like, what are some tangible actions, like 2 or 3, that the listener can hear our conversation and say, I can do that. I can be part of the solution. That's something I can do. It's a tangible action.
I think the first thing that I've just now begun to do is to use your voice. Because we were brought up to think that we were wrong or weird, a lot of times we don't really say what's on our mind or say what we think, but our different perspectives could be that one thing that can change things. It could be a catalyst for your environment. I think you're frozen, Diane. Are you still hearing me?
I'm here.
Okay. Your face is frozen. Okay. So don't be afraid to speak up and share those different perspectives that you have, because those are what the world needs. Those are the catalysts for the change that we're wanting to see. So it can be scary, and people around you may not understand what you're talking about, or they may, make jokes or that whole chestnut, but don't be afraid to do it because there could be that one person that you can impact. I would also say, don't be afraid to embrace fully who you are, outside of the perceptions of others. You won't be able to make that impact in the world that you're looking to do until you're able to do that. You have to peel away those layers first to discover what your purpose is and how you're supposed to contribute. Your answers are going to be hidden under all of that. So don't be afraid to buck the status quo, to divert, and be who you really internally feel like you are meant to be.
Oh, that's perfect. That's perfect. So I have one last question for you.
Yes.
And that is, if we were going to have a billboard that the whole world was going to see with your quote on it, the whole world now is going to see this billboard with Nicole White's quote. What quote would we put on that billboard?
Good question. There's a mountain of things popping into my head. I don't know which one.
You get a couple.
I would say, you're enough just as you are. And I would want that, whoever's driving by that highway sign to see that and feel something from that. Mm-hmm. And I would also say, I guess perhaps what I just said, don't be afraid to challenge the status quo and be different.
Right. Yeah. Like speaking your truth, even if it's a little scary, it's okay.
Yes. And understanding that, I think you mentioned it earlier, that when people do that, when they say bad things or bully you, that's their fear response. Understanding that people are actually potentially afraid of you, or afraid of your ideas, or afraid of what you can become. So their words don't mean that you're broken or that something's wrong with you. Their words are an expression of their own fear, their own insecurities that have nothing to do with you. So internalizing that is huge. And this is all relatively new about it's snapping for me finally, and I'm just now starting to really internalize all of this. So whenever I learn, I want to share that with other people. So just, you don't learn anything from anything I said today. Just internalize that their words are not reflections of you. It's a reflection of their fear of you.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I want to thank you for being here on Someone Gets Me with me. Someone Gets Me with me. And for being really honest about what it's like being in your shoes and how it is, and sharing with me how we've had to navigate this crazy, insane world. And we're continuing to do it. And I totally support the work that you're doing. I will always be supporting your work. I'm a fan. And
likewise.
And I'm really glad to know you and to know that you are putting that beautiful spirit of yours out into the world. I see it through your eyes. I feel it when I talk to you. And I just want to thank you for following your own vision and using your voice.
Thank you, Diane. And thank you for the work you've done over all these years. And like I said, finding you and finding your website and talking with you has really aided in my waking up journey. I guess we're going to call it that, my waking up journey. So you're a treasure to us. So thank you for this platform.
Oh, thank you so much. So remember, everybody, to check out all Nicole's information in the show notes, and go follow her on LinkedIn if you haven't already, and check out her website. She's doing a lot of amazing, amazing things. And so remember, put your face to the sun so the shadow falls behind you, because you're a rock star. You are here on purpose with a purpose. And it's your turn to speak your voice in a respectful, healthy manner. It's your turn to stand up in your own sovereignty and be who you're meant to be. That's the truth. Until the next episode of Someone Gets Me, be well.
Thank you for listening. I trust you gained some valuable inspiration and information. Please join me and other visionaries in the Someone Gets Me Facebook group. Or for more information on my services and additional episodes, visit someonegetsme.com. Again, thanks for listening.